Kilcoursey, the unsolved murder of Father Niall Molloy. On the evening of Sunday, the 7th of July, 1985, three good friends, Richard Flynn, his wife Teresa, and Father Niall Molloy shared drinks together in the master bedroom of the Flynn's home, Kilcoursey House, just outside Clara, County Offaly. Before sunrise the following morning, Father Niall Molloy would lie dead. The culprit made a full admission. However, the Molloy family's 40-year search for truth and justice had only just begun. In this episode, GSOC's 2-year investigation concludes. Attention on Father Niall's case is renewed by an award-winning documentary, an accompanying best-selling book, and a primetime programme revealing Richard Flynn's psychiatric report. All the while, calls for the government to establish an independent commission of investigation continue. Episode 8. Why hast thou forsaken me? 2017 began with the Minister for Justice, Frances Fitzgerald, responding to a parliamentary question put to her that January by Dublin Bay North TD Tommy Bruhan. The Minister revealed that Senior Counsel Mr Dominic McGinn had received a fee of €92,250, including VAT, for his review and report of the Garda review of Father Niall's murder. She explained that this fee had been sanctioned by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform. Just over a month later, on the 20th of February 2017, an article by Owen McConnell appeared in the Irish Times. The headline read, "Only man ever charged over priest death laid to rest." The article explained how Richard Flynn, at the age of 89, had died in a nursing home in Ballymahan, County Longford, following a lengthy illness. During the funeral mass, Richard's daughter Zandra would recite The Lake Isle of Innisfree by William Butler Yeats. Both David and Maureen eulogised their father. David was reported as tearfully describing his father as his best friend. He spoke of his father's love of rugby and how Richard had captained both junior and senior teams while in secondary school. Richard had also gone on to captain Connacht until an injury ended his career at the age of 25. According to David, Richard had planned to emigrate to America, but in 1955 he met and married David's mother, Teresa Brennan, and the couple settled down to married life in Ireland. Richard's eldest daughter Maureen shared with the 200 mourners memories of their amazing childhood growing up in Tubber House, where the table was always set, the fridge was always full, and Richard was always at the door, wide open, a big greeting for everybody. She would also reminisce about friends of their parents frequently joining them for dinner. Mum and Dad's pals came for dinner constantly. We took it for granted, all the coming and going, and no matter how late at night, Daddy would be at the door making sure everybody got to their car, directing them out the gate. After the funeral mass, Richard was laid to rest beside his first wife, Teresa, in Tubberclare Cemetery, just outside Athlone. Richard Flynn was survived by his second wife, Anne, son David, daughters Maureen, Zandra, Anita, and his grandchildren. Since the 2016 general election, there had been demands for the leader of Fine Gael and Taoiseach, Enda Kenny, to resign. Some backbench TDs lost confidence in the Taoiseach and called for a change in leadership. This was due to a loss of public support for the party and the exposure of a smear campaign carried out by the Gardaí against Sergeant Maurice McCabe, a Garda whistleblower. Mr. Kenny offered to reveal his plans for a leadership change, but not before returning from his St. Patrick's Day junket to the US. While attending the St. Patrick's Day parade in New York, the Taoiseach declared he would not stand down until issues surrounding Brexit and an upcoming election in Northern Ireland were resolved. He made clear his intent to attend the European Council meeting on Brexit that coming April and would then consider resigning the following month in May. On the 17th of May 2017, Enda Kenny stood down as leader of Fine Gael. He asked the party members of Fine Gael to elect his successor before the 2nd of June. Minister for Justice and Equality, Frances Fitzgerald, put her name down as a candidate. She would later decide against running, and she withdrew. With the large margin of votes from Fine Gael party members, combined with the votes of Fine Gael members in the Oireachtas, the Minister for Social Protection, Leo Varadkar, won the leadership contest. Minister Varadkar was elected leader of Fine Gael on the 2nd of June 2017. On the 13th of June, Enda Kenny resigned as Taoiseach. The following day in the Dáil, he formally nominated Leo Varadkar to succeed him as Taoiseach. In a vote of 57 to 50 with 47 abstentions, Leo Varadkar, aged 38, was elected as the youngest and first openly gay Taoiseach of Ireland on the 14th of June 2017. The new leader retained Frances Fitzgerald as his Taoiseach, but replaced her with Charlie Flanagan as his new Minister for Justice and Equality. Charlie Flanagan would be the 13th Minister for Justice to hold office since Father Niall's death. In April 2017, Garda Commissioner Noreen O'Sullivan was questioned by the policing authority. It transpired that Gardaí had been classifying some homicides not as murders, but as assaults causing harm. Scrambling to reassure the public, Commissioner O'Sullivan told the policing authority that a special review of 41 murder cases was underway, and she hoped to report its findings to the authority later that week. In a statement, the Deputy Garda Commissioner, John Toomey, told the Irish Examiner that there are some minor issues in relation to the classifications, but the key and most important point in all of this is the investigation that was conducted. We have done an examination and what we call a triangulation between the data and the investigations conducted by the SIOs, and we are absolutely satisfied that there was a full and proper investigation into each and every one of these deaths. This new Garda scandal of not correctly classifying murders was portrayed as being a recent practice by the Gardaí, when in fact murders had not been properly recorded for decades. Each year, An Garda Síochána publishes a report on crime statistics from the previous year. Their 1986 report, outlining the statistics from 1985, contained a heading: Murders recorded and detected by divisions. In the division of Laois, Offaly in 1985, the year Father Niall was killed, there were 0 murders recorded and 0 murders detected. Bill Maher, his cousin Henry McCourt, a qualified solicitor, and the remaining Molloy family members would never give up the fight for justice for their uncle Niall. Since the introduction of the Freedom of Information Act, the Molloys had been making requests for documentation they were entitled to have access to. Witness statements given to the SCRT after 2010 would finally help to explain who had suggested Father Niall's body be moved. A Flynn family witness would state, Father Duignan was an elderly man. He arrived first and said, "Let's move the body," while Sergeant Ford's statement to the SCRT alluded to Father Niall's body being moved again after he arrived but before the Technical Bureau arrived and took the photographs. When shown photos of the crime scene, he would tell the SCRT, "I have viewed the photographs and can say this is how I found the scene, with one difference. I have a recollection of that of the body being in a different position." Before Mr. McGinn's report had been published back in 2014, Henry had made formal requests to the Department of Justice for access to documents being held in relation to his uncle's death. These requests were initially ignored. Henry would then bring a case against the Department of Justice through the Information Commissioner, and on appeal, he and the Molloys would eventually be given access to documents held by the Department of Justice. However, they would only receive documents that came about after 2010, as at the time they would be informed that the documents were in the process of being reviewed. In 2017, Bill would gain access to other documents in his uncle's case from other sources and governmental departments. A letter dated the 25th of March 1988 to the head chaplain of the Department of Defence in Dublin, the Right Reverend Monsignor Edward Dunn, would be uncovered. The author of the letter was Father Niall's superior and family friend Dominic Conway, the Bishop of Elphin. Bishop Conway thanked the Monsignor for his cover letter of the 3rd of March 1988 with accompanying photocopies of all the documents in the Department of Defence records which related to the late Father Niall Molloy. In the second paragraph of the letter, Bishop Conway referred to receiving the proposed reply the Monsignor had drafted to be sent to representatives of the Molloys. The bishop stated he had no objection to Monsignor Dunn sending the reply, but he would suggest two changes. The name of a signatory did not correspond with the name on an attached document, so the bishop would point this out to the Monsignor. He would also suggest the placement of a lieutenant colonel's note in a more prominent position within the reply to the Molloys. The bishop wrote, "I offer you, however, for your discretion, the reflection which further occurs to me for what it's worth. I am wondering whether it might not be well to insert between your paragraphs 3 and 4 and the last 3 lines of Lieutenant Colonel's note, which you have marked obviously for my special attention, to Miss K. Sheehy, dated November 1986, quote, "There is no record of an officer of the Western Command having forwarded such a will to the Diocese Secretariat of the Diocese of Elphin. Thank you for this courtesy. I remain yours sincerely in Domino, Dominic Conway, Bishop of Elphin." Father Niall had served with the army in Cyprus from November 1972 until April 1973. An army memo addressed to the head chaplain's office in the Department of Defence, dated the 26th of September 1972, 2 months before his deployment, would also be uncovered. The memo documented the following: phone conversation of this date with Sergeant, name redacted, refers, "In respect of Reverend Father Niall Molloy, CF, who is proceeding to Cyprus with above unit, Father Molloy informs me that his will is held by Reverend Father John Kelly, St. Mary's, Sligo." Bill would also be shown documents in 2017 which would further prove evidence had been omitted from the original investigation. The surgeon who admitted Teresa Flynn to Tullamore Hospital in 1985 and who had declined the Garda's request to hand over Teresa's medical records as per her solicitor's advice, had offered to give evidence at the trial and inquest. He would never be approached to give evidence. Also, back in 1985, 2 Gardaí, not from the Technical Bureau, but from Dublin Castle, had been sent to Athlone to procure a statement from Mr. Egan in Fair and Murtha's solicitors. No statement from Mr. Egan existed in the Garda file, and he was never approached to give evidence at any stage in Father Niall's case. Bill would state, "From documents shown to me in 2017, it now transpires that the DPP instructed the Gardaí not to include the solicitor's statement in the Book of Evidence." On the 29th of May 2018, GSOC confirmed that after nearly 2 years, they had concluded their investigation. An article by James Fogarty published in the Roscommon Herald reported on the development. A spokesperson for GSOC advised that there was still some outstanding queries, and once those queries were dealt with, their report would be published, Until then, they had no further statement to make. Minister for Justice and Equality Charlie Flanagan had formerly been a TD representing Laois Offaly. When news broke of the conclusion of GSOC's investigation, he was asked about Father Niall's death on a visit back to his home county of Laois. Minister Flanagan told journalists that he had been familiar with Father Niall's case even before he had been elected to the Dáil. He added that his predecessor, Alan Shatter, had initiated an independent review undertaken by Mr. McGinn, senior counsel. He stated, "That review concluded that there did not appear to be anything by way of fresh evidence that might warrant further investigation. If there is fresh evidence or new evidence, that would obviously be taken into account, but I don't have any plans to institute or inaugurate any further investigations at this point in time." Bill Maher criticised the minister's comments as he claimed the Gardaí had told him that Father Niall's case remained an ongoing investigation. Mr. Fogarty reached out to the Garda press office for comment, but they did not respond before his article went to print in the Roscommon Herald. On the 9th of July 2018, a day after the 33rd anniversary of Father Niall's death, the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission, or GSOC, published a 4-page report along with a statement on their website. The statement explained that Richard Flynn, the only person ever charged in Father Niall's case, had been acquitted. Since then, Father Niall's unresolved death was still considered to be an open investigation. Mr. McGinn's report found that in light of the passage of time, coupled with the death of key witnesses, further investigation would not be likely to establish what had occurred, leading to the death of Father Molloy. However, Mr. McGinn had agreed with the SCRT's findings in relation to the deficiencies in the original investigation. As a result, GSOC was then approached by Mr. Henry McCourt, nephew of the late Father Molloy, to investigate the complaint about the deficiencies surrounding the original investigation into the death in 1985. In the complaint, Henry referred to the original investigation in 1985 as being shambolic, unprofessional, and an unacceptable investigation into the death of his late uncle, which has led to a serious miscarriage of justice in the case. The report itself explained that despite Mr. McGinn's recommendation that no further inquiry was warranted, Henry argued that this does not mean that the conduct of the Gardaí investigation and the performance of those Garda members involved could or should not be investigated further. Henry advised GSOC that he had not been given access to the SCRT report, but he had received some information from the SCRT who had explained as much as could be explained about the findings that had been made. The complaint Henry brought on behalf of the Molloy family would list a number of the deficiencies they felt warranted further investigation. These included: why was there a failure to interview a number of individuals who had been mentioned in witness statements taken at the time and who should have been interviewed as a matter of routine? Why was certain evidence concerning Father Niall's business and finances, which were crucial to understanding the motive and cause of his death, available to the Gardaí at the time, but not included in the Garda file? At the time of the examination of Father Niall's brain, Dr. Harbison made it known he had consulted with neuropathologist Dr. Michael Farrell. Why did the Gardaí not follow up by obtaining a report from Dr. Farrell, the medical expert in his field? Henry felt that if the Gardaí had consulted with Dr. Farrell on how long it could have taken Father Niall to die, it could have taken the Gardaí into other areas of investigation. Back in 1985, Dr. Maureen Smith of the Forensic Lab itemised and recorded receipt of each piece of physical evidence, the swabs from bloodstains and the blood samples taken from those involved. Henry wanted to know why no reports existed in the Garda file detailing any of the forensic test results other than the identification of blood groups. When the complaint was admitted in 2016, GSOC had briefed Henry on the manner in which they would approach the investigation. Under the provisions of the 2005 Act, if there is no criminal offence committed, once the investigation is completed, a report must be compiled. This report is then passed on to the Garda Commissioner with or without a recommendation about whether or not disciplinary proceedings should be instituted under the Garda Síochána Discipline Regulations of 2007. However, if during a disciplinary investigation it is found that there is evidence to suggest that the conduct under investigation does involve an offence or offences, the case can be upgraded to a criminal investigation. GSOC would also make clear to Henry the legislative constraints under which they had to operate. As the events surrounding Father Niall's death had taken place over 30 years before, Henry would be reminded that most, if not all of the Gardaí involved in the original investigation were by now retired. The Garda Síochána Act of 2005, which established GSOC, does not allow for the investigation of the actions of retired members of the Gardaí, as they can no longer be held liable for breaches of discipline that may have arisen when members of the Garda Síochána. To assist the investigation, Henry handed over documents which had been amassed from 1984 and 1985, as well as the medical reports his family had obtained on Father Niall down through the years. In the course of their investigation, GSOC discovered that a senior investigating officer in the Gardaí was still assigned to Father Niall's case, as it was classified as being still open. GSOC were provided with a significant amount of material from the original Garda investigation, as well as being given an opportunity to inspect documents still in the possession of the Gardaí. The report also explained it should be noted that while the GSOC investigation was open, Mr. McCourt also had access to Gardaí involved with reviewing the original investigation, and this cooperation should not be overlooked. However, GSOC also discovered that many of the original documents and all of the exhibits in evidence were missing. There had been no record kept of the handling of the evidence, so the people responsible for their loss could not be identified. They enlisted the help of the senior investigating officer still assigned to Father Niall's case to try to find the missing evidence. His searches, including a search of the forensic science lab, proved fruitless. Nothing was found. The investigation had gone as far as it could. GSOC eventually concluded that because the original Gardaí and Dr. Harbison were by now all retired, GSOC was precluded under the 2005 Act from proceeding further with the investigation of Mr. McCourt's complaint. They also determined that the deficiencies raised in Henry's complaint did not involve any criminal offence. No criminal charges would be considered. Because everyone was now retired, obviously no disciplinary measures could be taken either. The only aspect of the investigation GSOC did pursue and make recommendations on was in relation to the handling of evidence. Yet again, the Molloys were provided with no answers and no accountability. Noreen O'Sullivan resigned as Garda Commissioner in September 2017. During her tenure, revelations of misclassified murders and the ongoing fallout from the mistreatment of Garda whistleblowers dominated the headlines. Then, phantom roadside breath tests would also come to light. She would cite the unending cycle of requests, questions, instructions, and public hearings which prevented her from carrying out her duties as being the reason for her resignation. On the 9th of February 2018, when their investigation concluded, GSOC wrote to the acting Garda Commissioner, Mr. Donal O'Callaghan. GSOC laid out the following in their letter. What has disturbed the Commission is the fact that despite extensive searches by Garda personnel, it would appear that many original documents and all the exhibits could not be found, which may have assisted us in our inquiries. Highlighting the importance of now more than ever being able to refer back to evidence in cold cases, the Commissioners went on to write, Safekeeping of documents and exhibits has become even more pertinent with the developments we see on a regular basis in relation to forensic advances and the ability to solve serious cases years later, and sometimes decades later, continue to develop pace. Thus, this knowledge places an even higher onus on police services to keep safe the documents and evidence which could make prosecution successful into the future, even where witnesses may have moved on or died. This was not the first time GSOC encountered issues with Garda methods of storing evidence. As their letter would state, the issue of safekeeping of exhibits and related evidence in criminal investigations is a matter which GSOC has raised with An Garda Síochána on previous occasions. In this case, we have relatives of the late Father Molloy who have lost a loved family member and where the circumstances of that death 30 years later still causes pain. This pain, sadly, has been compounded by a belief that a poor investigation was carried out into their uncle's death at the time. The lack of regard shown to the evidence and documentation in this matter in the intervening years by Gardaí in many ways adds insult to injury, which is clearly not a result anyone would wish to see. In 2014, a Garda inspectorate conducted inspections of Garda stations and compiled an internal report called Crime Investigations. GSOC would bring the findings of the Crime Investigations report to the acting Garda Commissioner's attention by quoting, "During field visits, Gardaí were asked where case files are kept, and the consistent response was everywhere. The majority of Gardaí stated that files are kept in their lockers. In extreme cases, locations for keeping files included members taking them home. The retention of files by individual Gardaí removes the ability of superiors to check the progression of cases, and if officers are away from work for extended periods, then files are not readily available." GSOC would acknowledge the Gardaí's introduction of the PEMS, Property and Exhibit Management System, in recent years, but they were concerned evidence was not being sufficiently captured in this new system. The letter would go on to point out to the acting commissioner a recommendation made in the Crime Investigations report. The inspectorate recommends that the Garda Síochána conducts an urgent examination of the current process for exhibit and property management, medium term. GSOC also requested from the Gardaí a report as to the progress made in relation to the new PEMS process, as well as what direction is being given throughout the country in relation to open cases, the solving of which could bring relief to families such as the family of the late Father Molloy. The final paragraph on the final page of the GSOC report states, "The letter of the 9th of February to the Acting Commissioner was acknowledged by letter of the 21st of February 2018, which indicated that inquiries were being conducted into the matter. A reminder from the Commission dated the 16th of May 2018 elicited a response from Garda headquarters that a report on the issue was awaited. No response has been received to date." Bill Maher would give an interview to Olga Ahi of the Offaly Independent in July 2018 in response to the publication of the GSOC report. He described GSOC's report finding the original evidence was missing as, "It's just another Garda scandal." Bill told Olga, "Someone has to be answerable. This is the first time it has been admitted by an institute of the state, GSOC, that mistakes were made. We've been searching for justice for the last 33 years. People want the truth. It's an awful stain over Clara, and the people of Clara don't want it hanging over them." Justifying the need for an independent inquiry, Bill stated, "It's time this was all tidied up. After so many years, why not just get to the truth? Who's being protected? It's of no benefit to society to ignore it anymore." As GSOC were legally constrained in their powers to investigate retired Gardaí, Bill called for a new and independent inquiry to be established. Eugene Murphy, Fianna Fáil TD for Roscommon, also raised the issue in the Dáil and called on the Minister for Justice, Charlie Flanagan, to request the DPP investigate the case further. In the Dáil, Minister for Justice Charlie Flanagan assured Deputy Murphy that there was an ongoing Garda investigation into what is very much an open file. The Minister hoped that if the Deputy or any of his constituents had any information that might assist the Gardaí, that it might be forthcoming. Minister Flanagan reminded the Dáil that Mr McGinn had undertaken an independent review into the case in 2015. Relying on Mr McGinn's recommendation that no further investigation was warranted, Minister Flanagan told the Dáil that, "I don't have any grounds at this stage to take matters any further." A number of politicians who were outraged with the findings of the GSOC report were asked for their responses. Deputy Murphy called the findings of the report scathing and alarming. He explained that due to his enormous sympathy for the Molloy family and because they deserved justice, he would keep applying pressure on the government to see what can be done. Senator Terry Leyden from Roscommon, who had known Father Niall very well, stated that the case was mismanaged from the very start. He was our local curate. It was a privilege to have known him. It's a shame that a life could be snuffed out. He was a sincere and wonderful person. Justice was not done, and the justice system was not well served by the handling of the case by all concerned, including the judiciary. In September 2018, after an international recruitment drive, Acting Garda Commissioner Donal O'Callaghan was replaced by Drew Harris. Commissioner Harris had previously been the Deputy Chief Constable of the Police Service of Northern Ireland from 2014 to 2018. In an effort to restore the reputation of the Gardaí after recent scandals, Drew Harris was the first Garda Commissioner to be appointed from outside on Garda Síochána. On December 13, 2018, investigative journalist Gemma O'Doherty hosted a livestream event on YouTube about Father Niall's case. Her guests included Brian Sheridan, a former neighbour of the Flynns in 1985, and Jerry North, a schoolmate of David Flynn's. Jerry was also a very close friend of the Flynn's employee. Although Gemma had planned for retired Sergeant Kevin Ford to join the discussion, he was unable to participate due to illness. Instead, she shared 10 minutes of footage from a previous interview she had conducted with Sergeant Ford. Recalling the night he attended Kilcoursey House, Sergeant Ford did notice the broken watch on Father Niall's wrist at the scene. He confirmed its glass was broken and the hands of the watch were stopped at 10:40. This made him wonder what had gone on in the house before he arrived. He admitted he was disappointed over the outcome of the criminal trial and firmly believed that Richard Flynn was not the real culprit. Instead, he believed Richard had taken the blame for someone else. Sergeant Ford went on to describe his interview with the SCRT and how they didn't seem interested in carrying out an investigation. As with all the SCRT statements, Sergeant Ford's was summarised by Dominic McGinn for his report. Mr McGinn found it significant Sergeant Ford did not mention to Gardaí any of the issues of concern he had raised with Gemma. Sergeant Ford explained that in his interview with the SCRT, they just reviewed the same statements he had made down through the years. Because the SCRT statements had never been released, it is unknown if Sergeant Ford was ever asked about any of his concerns. Neither Brian Sheridan or Jerry North had a bad word to say about Father Niall, both describing him as a gentle and kind man. From spending time working in and around Kilcoursey House, Brian's impression was that Father Niall had been equally involved in the running of the business with Teresa. On leaving Maureen and Ralph's wedding on the Saturday night, Brian described how Father Niall walked him to his car just before 1 a.m. The following day, Sunday, Brian and his youngest daughter attended a horse show in Blessington. When they got home, his daughter encountered Father Niall out on his horse and trap at around 9 p.m. Father Niall stopped to chat and asked how she got on at the show. Her SCRT statement, also summarised by Mr. McGinn, does not mention that any conversation took place between this girl and Father Niall, downplaying the exchange. Instead, it states that she remembered seeing Father Niall in a horse-drawn trap heading towards Kilbeggan that Sunday evening. Brian went on to explain that the route Father Niall usually travelled on his horse and trap takes about an hour. He estimated Father Niall would have arrived back to the stables of Kilcoursey at around 10 p.m, after which he would have put away the gear and stabled the horses. Brian believes that Father Niall was attacked outdoors, pointing to evidence such as a leaf found under the priest's collar and his broken watch stopped at 10:40. He also criticised the lack of a thorough search of the stables and yard by the original investigating Gardaí. Brian agreed that Judge Rowe technically did the right thing by acquitting Richard Flynn. This is because he maintains Richard was not the guilty party, but was in fact protecting the real suspect. Jerry North also shared a striking account. His friend who worked for the Flynns was present at Kilcoursey House the night Father Niall died, and confided in Jerry shortly after the event. Jerry was also critical of the SCRT and their casual approach to interviewing witnesses. In his opinion, they barely questioned his friend. Instead of conducting an interview, the cold case Gardaí made small talk about dogs and horses. Jerry agreed that the real suspect could be arrested if those who were there that night looked to their conscience and came forward with the truth. Brian echoed Jerry's calls for witnesses to come forward to bring the case to justice. During the live-stream interview, Gemma provided further details relating to information she had uncovered when investigating the case while with the Irish Independent. She would divulge that the anguished eminent doctor referred to in her 4-page feature and her SCRT statement was Dr. Sean O'Grady, the county surgeon for Kilkenny. Dr. O'Grady was married to Teresa Flynn's sister, making him Teresa's brother-in-law. Gemma explained that a very well-known Kilkenny businessman had told her his good friend, Dr. O'Grady, was present in Kilcoursey House the night Father Niall died. The doctor confided in the businessman that he had terrible regrets about that night. The county surgeon died suddenly at the age of 50 in February 1986. Coincidentally, on the same day, Richard Flynn was in Tullamore Circuit Court applying for his trial to be moved to Dublin. In July 2019, a year after the publication of GSOC's report and around the time of the 34th anniversary of Father Niall's death, Bill Maher was still calling on the Minister for Justice to establish an independent commission of inquiry. In an article in the Roscommon Herald on the 11th of July, he claimed, "It's the only way of getting to the truth." Dennis Naughton, independent TD for Roscommon Galway, told the newspaper that he had requested that the Minister for Justice follow up with Garda Commissioner Harris regarding the GSOC report, pointing out that the report itself highlighted inadequacies in the investigation, but also how evidence was managed and stored, and was quite critical of that. Deputy Naughton explained that GSOC had requested a progress report on the issues raised over the storage and entering of evidence into the system. At the time of the report's publication, there was still no response from the Gardaí. As a result, he had asked the Minister for Justice to pursue this specific issue with the Office of the Garda Commissioner. When contacted, a spokesperson for the Gardaí stated the case remained the subject of an ongoing Garda investigation. As part of its modernisation and renewal programme, the Gardaí had introduced a property and exhibit management system to ensure the proper recording and storage of exhibits. An Garda Síochána will examine the report's findings relating to the organisation to see what lessons can be learned. Bill told the Roscommon Herald that he and his family had been asking the Minister for Justice for a meeting for over a year. When the Department of Justice was contacted for comment, they stated that Minister Flanagan had previously engaged with the family of Father Molloy and had responded to all correspondence from them. On the 14th of January 2020, Taoiseach Leo Varadkar asked President Higgins to dissolve the 32nd Dáil. A general election was then scheduled for the 8th of February 2020. Fianna Fáil won the most seats, followed by Sinn Féin and then Fine Gael. None of the parties had enough seats to form a majority government, so coalition talks began. During the election campaign, the Taoiseach had made it clear that Fine Gael would not enter into a coalition government with Sinn Féin. That left the possibility of a Fianna Fáil-Fine Gael coalition being formed. Fine Gael coming third in the election prompted Taoiseach Varadkar to offer his resignation on the 20th of February, but he remained in a caretaking role until the formation of the new government. While visiting Washington for St. Patrick's Day, the Taoiseach announced COVID-19 restrictions to take immediate effect in Ireland. With the country in lockdown, the pandemic also delayed the formation of the next government until June. On the 27th of June 2020, a three-party coalition consisting of Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green Party was formed. During the coalition talks, a power-sharing deal was struck between the leader of Fianna Fáil, Micheál Martin, and the leader of Fine Gael, Leo Varadkar. It was agreed that Micheál Martin would be appointed as Taoiseach, while Leo Varadkar assumed the roles of Taoiseach and Minister for Enterprise, Trade and Employment. After 2 years, in December 2022, Micheál Martin would then step down as Taoiseach and take up the positions of Taoiseach, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Defence. Leo Varadkar would become Taoiseach again and for the remainder of the coalition's term in government. In the preceding June, when the coalition government had been formed, Fine Gael's Helen McEntee was announced as the new Minister for Justice. Daughter of Fine Gael TD Shane McEntee, Helen's political career began when she won the by-election in her father's constituency after his sudden death. Helen McEntee is the 14th Minister for Justice appointed since Father Niall's death. The 8th of July 2020 marked the 35th anniversary of Father Niall's death. Over the years, Father Niall's nephew, Father Billy Molloy, made the journey from the UK to celebrate the anniversary Mass in Castlecoot. In the preceding August, Father Billy had retired to County Roscommon. The number of attendees at the Mass in Castlecoot was restricted to 50 people. After Mass, a group of Father Niall's remaining family, friends and loyal parishioners socially distanced as they prayed, while Father Billy blessed Father Niall's grave. On the 18th of December 2020, Ireland's first state pathologist, Professor John Harbison, died. Professor Harbison had retired in 2003 after a 30-year career, which saw him involved in some of the highest-profile murder cases in the Irish state. Reported as passing away peacefully, Professor Harbison died 5 days before his 85th birthday. Based in Dublin, Sharon Lawless is an award-winning producer, writer and director. Marissa Fagan, an award-winning journalist, worked as a senior reporter with the Roscommon Herald for over 10 years. At different stages in their careers, both women became intrigued by Father Niall's case. Sharon, who has relatives in the Midlands, knew about the case since Father Niall's death in 1985, but a meeting with members of the Molloy family in 2017 would inspire her to examine the case in more detail. Sharon then began to write and develop a documentary on the killing of Father Niall. Marissa Fagan had become very familiar with the case from her time as a senior reporter with the Roscommon Herald. She would collaborate on the project with Sharon, conducting extensive research into Father Niall and Teresa's partnership. Her meticulous research uncovered the failed deal between Father Niall and the Flynns to buy land in Letterfrack in 1984. When the Land Commission refused the plans for Letterfrack, the deal to buy land at Kilcoursey was drawn up instead. In September 2021, produced by Sharon's production company, Flawless Films, and in cooperation with Father Niall's family, The Killing of Father Niall Molloy aired in 2 parts on RTE1. The documentary featured many of Father Niall's parishioners. Their fond memories of Father Niall, both as a friend and as a priest, showed that their admiration for him has never waned. They staunchly defended his reputation while still refusing to believe an affair with Teresa Flynn was the reason for his death. While members of Father Niall's family described the impact the case has had on their lives and how the institutions of the state, in particular the church, neglected them in their time of need. A detailed summary of the case was provided, starting from the moment Sergeant Ford was awoken in the early hours of the morning on the 8th of July 1985. Sergeant Ford was interviewed for the documentary. He recalled that back in 1985, he felt that the whole situation seemed contrived. Local men, Jerry North and Brian Sheridan, shared their recollections of the Flynns, Father Niall, the business partnership between them, and the news of Father Niall's death. Jerry also relayed the stories he had heard from someone who was known to have been in Kilcoursey House that night. Not only did he hear Father Niall was struck with a statue of a horse downstairs, but apparently over a dozen people fled Kilcoursey House as the assault took place. Detective Inspector Christy Mangan, who headed up the SCRT, would state that he interviewed the individual who was reportedly in the house that night, but that person denied witnessing anything. Jerry North's account resembles the testimony given by Dr. O'Sullivan at Father Niall's inquest. When asked, Dr. O'Sullivan had very little doubt that Richard Flynn told him the altercation began downstairs. Jerry's story also aligns with the rumours from the time and the anonymous letter received by the Molloys. The documentary emphasises, though, that without a corroborating witness, Richard Flynn's official version of events remains the only account. However, one previously unknown aspect of the case involving Father Duignan was revealed. James Gibbons, a journalist from Clara, had known Father Duignan personally. He recalled once asking Father Duignan about the Flynn case. The elderly priest confessed that when he drove back to the parochial house that night, it wasn't to get his glasses or check Dr. O'Sullivan's phone number. Father Duignan admitted to James Gibbons that he drove home to call Mullingar for advice. Mullingar was the home of Father Duignan's superior at the time, His Grace John McCormack, the Bishop of Meath. If true, Father Duignan committed perjury under oath at both the trial and at the inquest. By utilising crime scene maps and photographs, the master bedroom in Kilcoursey House was impressively reconstructed. Former crime scene specialist with Merseyside Police Angela Doyle, former state pathologist for Northern Ireland Professor Jack Crane, and forensic psychologist Dr. Ciara Staunton would contribute to the documentary. The 3 experts were shown into the reconstructed bedroom while being provided with the details of the Garda file. They put forward their assessment of the crime scene versus the official versions of events by offering their theories as to what might have really happened in the master bedroom. Professor Crane also determined from examining Father Niall's lung slides that after sustaining head injuries, he was left lying on the floor for hours. Alan Jukes, who had been the Minister for Justice back in 1986, was then interviewed on camera. He admitted that the original Garda investigation had been an absolute mess, but he didn't know why. Controversially, Mr. Jukes would also state that it was time to call it a halt. While acknowledging this would be unsatisfactory and grief-inducing for Father Niall's family, Mr. Jukes couldn't see any way that Father Niall's family could find out exactly what had happened that night. His comments were branded as disrespectful in the media after the episode aired. Bill is then shown hand-delivering yet another letter to Leinster House. He writes to each successive Minister for Justice on behalf of his family, asking for a meeting and the establishment of an independent commission of investigation. Sharon and Marissa's documentary, The Killing of Father Niall Molloy, would reignite calls for an independent commission of investigation. Fianna Fáil's senator from Roscommon, Eugene Murphy, told Nicola Barden of the Irish Sun, "It's pretty clear there needs to be a proper investigation into Father Molloy's death, which remains open 36 years later. The fact is revealed, so much is left open, has a lot of people thinking, and I'm pretty resolved in my opinion that we had to press ahead and get a commission of inquiry from my parliamentary party and the Minister for Justice." A week later, on the 23rd of September, Sinn Féin's Martin Kenny tweeted that he intended to ask the Minister for Justice to establish a commission of investigation. In the Dáil, Fianna Fáil Junior Minister James Brown, on behalf of the Minister for Justice, quoted verbatim from the McGinn report, stating that it was unlikely that any further inquiry would have a reasonable prospect of establishing the truth. Despite protests from members of Sinn Féin, the government again ruled out the possibility of establishing an independent commission of investigation. In April 2022, the critically acclaimed two-part documentary The Killing of Father Niall Molloy would win Best Factual Series at the Royal Television Society Awards. For many years, the Molloy family tried to obtain a copy of the transcript from Richard Flynn's trial. Court records are held under the control of the judiciary and are not accessible under the Freedom of Information Act. Initially, the Molloys had been informed by the judiciary that the transcript did not exist, claiming it was never recorded. However, the Molloys knew it existed as they had previously been shown and had read a copy of the transcript. It would take the intervention of a judge, following the Molloys' persistence, but eventually, in January 2022, a copy of the transcript was finally handed over. Bill would subsequently post a copy of the trial transcript on the Justice for Father Niall Molloy website. On the 4th of October 2022, Sharon Lawless and Marissa Fagan released a book called Anatomy of an Injustice, The Killing of Father Niall Molloy. Sharon and Marissa spent years researching the case to produce their award-winning two-part documentary. However, Father Niall's case being so vast, it is impossible to convey everything within 2 episodes. Publishing a book provided Sharon and Marissa with the means of presenting all the additional information their years of research had revealed. On Tuesday, the 11th of October 2022, a week after the publication of Sharon Lawless and Marissa Fagan's book, Anatomy of an Injustice, The Killing of Father Niall Molloy, RTE's Primetime aired an episode focused on potential developments in Father Niall's case. Paul Murphy with RTE Investigates presented a 20-minute feature within the Primetime programme, outlining the contents of 3 previously unseen documents that had recently been obtained by RTE. RTE Investigates did not state who had provided the documents or why they had only come to light now. Nor did they examine the motivations behind why the documents were written in the first place. While asserting there was no compelling evidence to suggest that money was the motive behind Richard Flynn's killing of Father Niall, Primetime claimed that these newly uncovered documents may point to a different motive. The first document, a 6-page psychiatric report, was commissioned by Richard's defence team in November 1985. Dr. Liam Hannafy, chief psychiatrist at St. Fintan's Hospital, Portlaoise, had assessed Teresa while she was an inpatient in hospital. Dr. Hannafy was also commissioned by Richard's defence team to perform a psychological assessment of Richard in advance of his trial. While Richard acknowledged he didn't believe that there was any physical liaison between his wife and Father Niall, the statements he made to his psychiatrist alluded to the priest being a third wheel in his marriage for quite some time. When it came to the row in the bedroom that night, Richard told the psychiatrist that he couldn't recall exactly what happened, but he vividly recalled hitting Father Niall one particular blow on the left side of his jaw. He stated, "I must have hammered him, but I honestly only remember that particular blow, as I will never forget the expression on his face when I hit him." He recalled his wife physically attacking him at this juncture as she screamed, "You've killed him! You've killed him!" In his report, Dr. Hannafy concluded that Richard's attack on Father Niall was frenzied in its nature due to pent-up resentments. The second document featured, also commissioned by Richard's defence team, was dated the 18th of May 1986, just a few weeks before Richard stood trial in Dublin. In this document, Richard admitted to his defence team that he didn't just throw punches at Father Niall. He wrote, "At this stage, I butted him into the face several times with my head and pushed him away. Before pushing him away, when he failed to hit me in the face, he tried to knee me into the groin twice, but I swerved to avoid him. All this time he was shouting, 'You fucking bastard, you will get me a drink.' At this stage, I had another lapse of memory. Then I remember hitting him one punch on the left side of the jaw. Then I had another blackout, and the next thing I saw was him lying on the floor. Then I grabbed him by the shoulders and dragged him as far as the door. While I was dragging him, my wife was punching me in a downwards fashion. Then I gave her a punch, and she fell." The third document featured by Primetime was a 14-page outline for a potential book deal with a UK-based publisher. Composed by Richard Flynn on Richspeed-headed paper in February 1988, the outline for the book was written just 3 months after a High Court judgment in the amount of £125,000 was made against Richard by Irish Revenue. None of these documents were produced at the trial or at the inquest, nor were they made available to the SCRT when they conducted their review in 2010. Apart from being featured in this primetime programme, these documents have never been released into the public domain. 3 days later, on the 14th of October 2022, Bill Maher gave his reaction to the primetime programme to Paul Williams of the Irish Independent. Bill stated that Richard Flynn's admissions, which have only come to light in these newly uncovered documents, only raise more questions than answers, and he felt they were laden with inconsistencies. Bill wondered why the psychiatrist's report was only coming to light now. He felt that all it did was reignite old rumours and gossip, which tarnished his uncle's reputation. Bill told Paul Williams that he had turned down the invitation to take part in the primetime programme as he had not been given the full contents of the 3 documents. He therefore felt he was not in a position to give a comprehensive response. Saturday, the 8th of July 2023, was the 38th anniversary of Father Niall's death. Anniversary Mass, due to be held the following day, would be celebrated by Father Niall's nephew, Father Billy Molloy. Bill Maher would give an interview to Owen Murphy of the Irish Mirror, which was published on Father Niall's anniversary. The headline of the article read, "Father Niall Molloy was my uncle, and there are people alive who can solve the mystery of his death." In the article, Bill would plead with anyone who has any information to come forward. He stated, "There are several other people still alive who can solve the case. It's a stain on all of them, and their children are going to live with it, just like my family." He urged them to Just come clean and forget all about it. While addressing the government's lack of willingness to establish a commission of investigation, Bill told the Irish Mirror, "I'd like them to get the finger out and open a commission of investigation before I pop my clogs. I don't know what's holding them back. Just clear it all up." Appreciating the unwavering fondness Father Niall's parishioners had for his uncle, Bill explained that their continued support and encouragement only strengthened his resolve. He stated, "The parishioners really held him in very high esteem and still do. I go down every year for the Mass, and one or two of them always come up to me and say, 'You've done a great job. Keep fighting. Keep fighting.' That only spurs me on. It's nice to know I've the support of them, as well as the family." On Sunday, the 9th of July, after 11:30 Mass, Father Niall's surviving family members, friends and loyal parishioners said prayers by his graveside, while Father Billy blessed his grave. What we now know about Father Niall's violent murder makes for a disturbing crime. However, this unsolved case is not just limited to Father Niall's gruesome murder. A cover-up amounting to obstruction of justice, which began that night within Kilcoursey House, continues to this day. Concerted efforts were made by the Flynns to keep their financial problems a secret. They also managed to distract from money being the most plausible motive for Father Niall's death by allowing salacious rumours and conjecture to fill the void in the absence of any facts. When David Flynn spoke to the SCRT in 2011, he insisted more than once that there had been no family discussion to follow any particular plan of action that night. If so, then why did the Flynns need up to 6 hours before alerting the guards? What decisions were being made during that time? If the Flynns had nothing to hide, then why tamper with the scene? Why move the body, attempt to clean it, and then lie about it? The actions of the Flynns, combined with the delay of an entire week before providing statements that were coordinated yet lacking in detail, strongly suggests that there was something else the Flynns were trying to conceal. The Flynns would not have been able to put forward such an ambiguous version of events without the complicity of other family members, friends, and associates. But as you have heard, Father Niall's death holds profound implications that have extended well beyond Kilcoursey House and the Flynns. The major institutions of the Irish state have all played a part in obstructing justice in the case of Father Niall, each in a different way, each motivated by different agendas. The actions of these institutions have consistently hindered any progress being made. Instead of fulfilling their duties, so far, each institution of state has utterly failed Father Niall and his family. The Church's complicity in obstruction began when Father Duignan phoned the bishop in Mullingar for advice. To save the Church from any apparent scandal, it is no surprise the elderly priest then suggested Father Niall be moved further away from the couple's marital bed. He would go on to set the tone for the Church by telling Sergeant Ford that a man, a priest he didn't know, was dead in the Flynn's home, and in his words, because it would be considered a scandal, is there any way it could be kept quiet? The added fear of Teresa being named in Father Niall's will and how that would look made the Church completely deny the existence of any will. Even when documents and a witness alleged the will had been sent to the diocese in Sligo, the current bishop for Elphin, Kevin Doran, still maintains it was never received. The Church's conduct throughout the case has been that of self-preservation. In an unusual move, they enlisted a Dublin solicitor to help Father Duignan prepare to give evidence at the inquest. It is of note that Father Duignan was the only independent witness to appear with their own legal representation. He was well advised and armed with the legal precedent of sacerdotal privilege. When he was killed, instead of offering spiritual support, the Catholic Church in Ireland abandoned Father Niall and his family. Bishop Dominic Conway had not only been Father Niall's superior, but he had at one time taught Niall and was a good friend of the Molloy family. When William Molloy challenged Bishop Conway's loyalty and support for a dead fellow priest, the bishop ceased all contact with the Molloys. According to William, all the church worried about was scandal and their image. Having previously described to Tom Reddy how the Pope's secretary and Niall's friends from Rome all sent sincere condolences at the time of his death, William then told Tom the Irish priests ran a mile. Before Father Niall's death, the Molloy family historically had a very close relationship with the church. Various priests, missionaries and nuns were regular guests of the Molloys at Carrow Park. They then described the church as suddenly pulling back from their family after Father Niall's murder. This caused a lot of hurt, as in the past they would have turned to the church in their time of need. On Father Niall's 35th anniversary, Father Billy Molloy told James Fogarty of the Roscommon Herald, "There was a wall of silence from the church. I think the church believed the lies that were invented about Niall. The church swallowed those lies, hook, line and sinker, to their shame. But to the people of Castlecoot, I'd take my hat off to them any day of the week. I'm very proud of them. They loved Niall as a son." It is now an accepted fact that the original Garda investigation into Father Niall's death in 1985 was a complete mess. Were these actions due to incompetence or complicity? Examples of the basic failures of that investigation have been highlighted many times. The powers that GSOC hold prevents the original Gardaí from being questioned or disciplined, nor did their actions constitute any criminal offence. No one has ever been held to account for these mistakes, but the law does allow for retired members of the Gardaí to be subpoenaed to testify if a commission of investigation were ever established. Despite Richard being a failing businessman, he still had very well-connected and powerful friends. In his time of need, Richard's circle of influential and political acquaintances would rally around him. There is no doubt the case was being followed closely by the most senior Gardaí. Just before the inquest, a deputy Garda commissioner ordered addendums to statements about Father Niall's watch when its mishandling was exposed by Today Tonight. Who amongst the Garda hierarchy could direct the suppression of evidence? What kind of political pressure was being applied to senior Gardaí? According to the guards, Father Niall's murder remains an open case. Down through the years, the Gardaí probed certain aspects of the case, such as trying to investigate the source of anonymous letters. Publicly, they invited any new evidence. Privately, when evidence was presented to the Gardaí, they took no action. One example being when potential insurance fraud came to light, or when new, compelling medical evidence was produced, they would not give any reasonable explanation for not reopening the case. After 25 years, when public pressure could no longer be ignored, the SCRT were appointed to conduct a cold case review. However, from the outset, the SCRT were limited within the scope of their investigation. Instead, they were told to conduct a review focused on dispelling rumours. Only the most senior Gardaí would have been involved in setting the terms of reference. Adding to their limitations, the law constrained Gardaí from compelling people to talk. But at the same time, their questioning of witnesses was ineffectual, sometimes irrelevant, and bore no results. The SCRT's main recommendation, however, was an independent commission of investigation should be convened in order to fully investigate Father Niall's case. This recommendation was suppressed. Instead, a politically charged decision was taken to have a senior counsel summarize and censor the actual contents of the report. Christy Mangan, the now retired head of the SCRT, recently released a book titled Cracking the Case. In a career spanning 40 years, he investigated over 100 murders, including the review of Father Niall's. He wrote that he still believes the only way to get to the truth in Father Niall's case is through an independent commission of investigation. If a commission was established, not only could witnesses be compelled to testify under oath, but the contents of the SCRT report could also be made public. It appears that unless evidence is uncovered that would bring about criminal charges, the Garda's involvement has now come to an end. Bill Maher expressed his family's relief that the Gardaí will play no further part in his uncle's case. Eamon Barnes, the Director of Public Prosecutions who recommended charges be brought against Richard Flynn, died in 2017. That same year, Bill Maher was shown documents indicating Mr. Barnes had directed the suppression of Mr. Egan's statement about the partnership between Father Niall and Teresa from being entered into the Garda Book of Evidence. Unfortunately, there had not been an opportunity to put these allegations to Mr. Barnes before he died. After Richard's acquittal, Eamon Barnes had asked the counsel for the prosecution, Mr. Raymond Groark, to outline in writing why he believed Judge Rowe instructed the jury to find Richard not guilty. In his summary, Mr. Groark admitted, "If I had been defending the case, I would have been most surprised and disappointed not to have obtained a direction to acquit, having regard to the evidence on cross-examination." The Gardaí had concluded in the Book of Evidence that money was the most likely motive for Father Niall's death. Despite this, Mr. Groark did not offer any explanation as to why the state did not present any evidence about finances or the business partnership at the trial, nor why witnesses who had offered to testify were never called. In the 1990s, when working for the Sunday Independent, Veronica Guerin uncovered 2 alleged letters from Judge Frank Rowe to the DPP. Veronica claimed to have seen the first letter sent by Frank Rowe to Eamon Barnes, admitting he knew the Flynns and Father Niall, written before Richard Flynn had been charged. The Sunday Independent stated that the handwriting could be identified as Justice Rowe's by comparing it to other examples of his handwriting. Since the deaths of Veronica Guerin and Martin Cahill, the whereabouts of these letters is unknown. The SCRT did not find any documentary evidence to prove Judge Rowe knew the parties involved. On the other hand, they didn't make much effort to disprove it either. An employee of the Department of Justice who had been assigned to work as an usher for the judge was interviewed by the SCRT. The usher told the Gardaí that Judge Rowe never discussed the Flynn case or any other case with him. As his duties were mainly as a valet and a driver, he could not answer questions put to him as he was not aware of the judge's private matters. 2 judges, colleagues and friends of Frank Rowe, gave interviews to the Irish Independent in 2010 and 2012. They both conveyed their disapproval of Judge Rowe hearing Richard's case and his instruction to the jury. Their friendship with Frank Rowe and their professional opinions as to his conduct suggested they would have been better qualified to answer the SCRT's questions about the judge's impartiality. Setting aside any neuropathologists who have provided reports in recent years, doctors who were involved in the initial investigation also played a part in the cover-up. The Flynns were at pains to ensure that their friend, Dr. Dan O'Sullivan, was the doctor alerted that night. The ambiguity over who called to Dr. O'Sullivan's house and at what time of the morning has never been adequately clarified. Dr. Greeley of Tullamore A&E Department initially told Ian Maher that Teresa had been admitted between midnight and 2 a.m. In advance of the inquest, he amended this to a later time of just after 3 a.m. If Dr. O'Sullivan had been found to have driven Teresa to hospital hours earlier than was officially reported, it would prove that the events in Kilcoursey House took place much earlier than were claimed. A later admission time for Teresa would be a better fit for the Flynns' narrative. Father Niall's brain slides had been examined in the presence of a neuropathologist, Dr. Michael Farrell, not long after the post-mortem. Dr. Farrell's expert opinion would not have left any room for manoeuvre in relation to the brain injuries being the cause of death. At Richard's trial, the complacent delivery of Professor Harbison's medical evidence gave the defence the opportunity they had been looking for. On realising his mistake, Professor Harbison delivered his evidence much more emphatically at Father Niall's inquest, with the correct verdict then being determined. There had been claims that a prominent doctor was in Kilcoursey House the night Father Niall died, and what he witnessed caused him great anguish. This doctor is said to have died at a relatively young age, within a year of Father Niall's death. Detective Inspector Jerry O'Carroll and Dominic McGinn both looked into this claim. They concluded the only prominent doctor in the house that night was Dr. O'Sullivan, thereby enabling the claim to be dismissed as mere conjecture. It is known that one of Teresa Flynn's sisters was married to the county surgeon of Kilkenny, Dr. Sean O'Grady. Dr. O'Grady, an uncle of the bride through marriage, would have been a guest at Maureen and Ralph's wedding. He reportedly died suddenly and at a relatively young age from a heart attack in February 1986. In the 1980s, Dr. Liam Hannafy, chief psychiatrist in Portlaoise Hospital, also attended patients in Tullamore Hospital. For 3 days after Father Niall's death, he provided inpatient consultations on Teresa's mental state. The following November, Liam Lycett enlisted Dr. Hannafy to examine and provide a psychiatric report on Richard Flynn in advance of the trial. The salacious report, without any basis, was aired by RTÉ's primetime a week after the publication of the book Anatomy of an Injustice, The Killing of Father Niall Molloy. The timing of the release of Richard's psychiatric report from 1985 is proof that an active campaign still exists to cover up aspects of this case. Political influence in this case should not be underestimated. The Flynns had very powerful friends. Both Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael have been caught up in this case at one point or another. Good friends of the Flynns, the Lenahans, were a Fianna Fáil family with great influence in the Midlands. Ralph Park's Uncle Michael was a member of the Fianna Fáil executive, whereas Liam Lycett and Judge Frank Rowe were both lifelong and staunch Fine Gaelers. Party affiliations have been irrelevant, as Father Niall's murder became a bipartisan political issue. Each time an election rolled out, in order to get votes, political promises of a full investigation would be made, only for these promises to be forgotten once they got into power. Every sitting government, since Father Niall's death, have actively tried to dismiss, suppress, discredit, or pass the buck whenever controversy arose. The conclusion of Mr. McGinn's report in 2015 was something of a gift for politicians. They no longer had to desperately pluck reasons out of thin air to justify not investigating any further. The independent senior counsel was of the opinion that because many of the main players are dead and so much time has passed, it is now unlikely that truth can ever be established. Each Minister for Justice or their spokesperson have since regurgitated this conclusion ad infinitum. But unless every means of investigation available is exhausted, how can it be definitively claimed that the truth can never be known? Who are they still trying to protect? In April 2024, Fine Gael's Simon Harris replaced Leo Varadkar as Taoiseach. Fianna Fáil gained the most seats in the 2024 general election and once again entered into a coalition with Fine Gael. Fianna Fáil's Micheál Martin resumed his role as Taoiseach, with Simon Harris being appointed Taoiseach. Justice Minister Helen McEntee, who wasn't even born when Father Niall was killed, moved on to become Minister for Education and Youth. The 15th Minister for Justice to be appointed since Father Niall's death was Jim O'Callaghan. Minister O'Callaghan holds law degrees from both UCD and Cambridge University and is a qualified barrister. He was also the Fianna Fáil spokesperson on justice in the previous Dáil. In recent years, the Irish government has shown some willingness to confront painful truths and to reinvestigate past injustices. For example, the Stardust disaster or the mishandling of the Kerry babies case. Will this current Minister for Justice be willing to reconsider opening an independent inquiry into Father Niall's case? Bill Maher told the Irish Mirror in July 2022 there are several other people still alive who can solve this case. Of those who are known to have passed through Kilcoursey House between the 7th and 8th of July 1985, there remains 11 surviving witnesses. David and his ex-wife Anne, Maureen and Ralph, Zandra and Anita, Dennis and Marie Hochter, Ralph's best man and groomsman, and the stable hand who worked for the Flynns. By establishing an independent commission of investigation, all potential witnesses can be called on to testify under oath. For the first time, there may be an opportunity to question retired Gardaí, the remaining witnesses who were involved, and to examine the veracity of witness statements. With open terms of reference, aspects of the case that have always caused concern could finally be addressed, perhaps even answered. July 8th, 2025 is the 40th anniversary of Father Niall's death. His nephews and nieces are now the older generation, and with the passing of each year, their hope of getting justice and truth fades. The next generation of Father Niall's family are just as determined to get to the truth and will continue to seek justice until all avenues of investigation have been completely exhausted. Father Niall's death is still classified as an open case, and there is no statute of limitations for murder. The Molloy family statement was published on the Justice for Father Niall's website 12 years ago, but its message still resonates just as strongly today. We would like to give the last word on the matter to Father Niall's family. The effect of Father Niall's death 28 years ago was not only to rob his family of a kind and gentle pastor and friend, but to place them under a dark cloud which still hangs over us all to this day. Some family members, particularly Ian Maher, fought with all their strength for justice to be done, lost their jobs, and sometimes their health and their family in the process, and perhaps died before their time. There were sometimes temporary breaks in the cloud when it looked like the truth might somehow be revealed, but which were only to be thwarted by further setbacks. The greatest of the many injustices done to Father Molloy and his family, apart from the taking of his life, was the damage done to his good name by the calculated and vicious leaking of false innuendo to sully his reputation. The family may have lost faith in the country's institutions, but they never lost faith in the intrinsic goodness of the Irish people and their belief that one day someone would look to their conscience and once and for all reveal the truth. To facilitate this, the members of Father Niall's family call for a public inquiry into all aspects of this matter, including the roles played by the institutions of the state in preventing the truth from being revealed. Only when this has been done will the family find closure and the cloud will be lifted. This series was written, produced and edited by Liv Kerwin. Narrated by Marcus Kerwin. Music, Take Up Your Cross by Onchenko Music. We would like to extend our very special thanks to Mr. Bill Maher and Father Niall's family. This series is dedicated to the memory of Joe, Matthew, and Tony. This has been a Kurska production.